realism. A term that's as enticing as it is contentious. It's also one that's been popping up all over the gaming space these days. This shooter game will have the most realistic destruction in an FPS, or this game has the most realistic graphics you've ever seen. When I read that a game is a tactical shooter with a maximum focus on realism, it sounds cool, but I'm a bit skeptical. Maybe we would have some deep weapon or gear customization here, maybe several ammo types, complex healing animations, and perhaps most interestingly, maybe a more lifelike depiction of private military contractors and the politics surrounding them. All interesting stuff, but to be honest, I didn't really see it going farther than that. And then, a few days ago, I sat down to watch this demo. What I saw there, and I do not say this lightly, blew my mind. Ahead of the deep breakdown, here are the core takeaways. This game, in my opinion, has the potential to be the most realistic portrayal of firearms ever attempted in a video game. Every aspect of the portrayal of weapons has been extensively researched, including one-on-one engagement with experts in the field like Jonathan Ferguson of the Royal Armouries Museum in Leeds. You know, the guy who makes all those firearms expert reacts to X video games guns videos. Yeah, the devs worked with him directly on this one. The ballistics simulations on display were so complex that simulated ballistics gel in a dev environment was used to visually demonstrate the damage caused by various rounds. And before we get dug into the serious info, yeah, you can bounce bullets off water. Madfinger Games, the developers of Gray Zone Warfare, and especially their CEO Marek Rabas, have repeatedly talked about how they are attempting to evolve the FPS genre, that they're doing things that no one in the industry has ever really attempted. Mara told me this personally, actually, in my interview with him, that he was always having to hold his tongue when talking to industry colleagues. It was just hard to not flex how cool some of the stuff that they were working on was.
I think we push really far. I don't think that some other guys have something what we have.
At the time he told me this, it was all a bit meaningless. Now, I think I have a bit of an idea of what he meant. Now, Mara, in the last creator meeting that we did before this one, had mentioned the game's simulation of terminal ballistics, the science of how projectiles act when transferring their kinetic energy to a material or target. In layman's terms, what happens when a bullet hits something. Mara talked about rounds making cavities in their targets, how bullets would affect flesh, armor, and materials differently, with different levels of damage as a result. I guess I hadn't grasped at the time that when he said they were simulating this, he was not joking. Okay, so science class is in session now. Terminal ballistics measures the impact a projectile has on a target. This impact is affected by energy, as in the kinetic energy held by the projectile as it hits the target, velocity, as in how fast that projectile is moving in comparison to the target, penetration capability, which I will break down in a second, and lastly, the physics of the round must be taken into consideration, such as the round's jacket if it has one, the deformation of the bullet's core, the way it disintegrates upon impact, the rotation and movement caused by impact, and of course, the way that all of these things affect the material the round has come in contact with, its hardness or softness, the way kinetic energy causes deformation, and the temporary and permanent cavities created thusly. It's both fascinating and gruesome stuff. You might be saying, I thought we were jumping into the info here. Is he talking about real life or the game? Well, both, actually. Let's look at a specific example in engine. In this clip, he's shooting 5.56 by 45 FMJ ammunition, or full metal jacket. That means the bullet is a lead core with a copper or copper nickel alloy jacket, also referred to as ball ammunition. This is your basic 5.56 round, fired out of an AR-15 pattern rifle. These rounds largely bounced off this metal surface, but in two cases, the round's core penetrated due to the copper jacket being shredded off and the lead core continuing on. Not actually 100% sure on this, but I believe that's what this red designates. The round's jacket allows it to pierce the first layer of metal, and the drastically deformed and slowed round bounced off the second layer, causing it to fall harmlessly to the ground. Ball ammo is pretty standard. What isn't is highly penetrating rounds like 5.56 M995, a tungsten carbide core round designed for maximum penetration in comparison to a standard lead core. We can really witness the depth of the simulation here. A couple rounds have significantly more deformation, and their interaction with the metal plating causes their trajectories to vary drastically. But long story short, if you wondered if you could penetrate materials with rounds in this game, yeah. Not only can rounds pen materials in Gray Zone Warfare, but what happens after they penetrate those materials will have different effects based on several parameters. Those aspects I mentioned earlier, remember, energy, velocity, penetration, but also which material the round passed through. Wood, steel, concrete, they'll all interact with the projectile differently. Here's an example. Wood, it's softer than steel, right? So when you fire ball ammo into wood at an angle, the trajectory from which the ricocheted round bounces is different than the trajectory of a round bouncing off of steel. The harder material deforms the round less, eats less of that kinetic energy, meaning the round ricochets at a tighter angle. And all materials behave differently, including, like I said at the beginning, water. Fire a round at a high angle, and the bullet will obviously cut straight into the water, massively slowing down the round, of course, but at a perfect shallow angle. But this is real science. This actually happens in real life. Again, what fascinates me about all this is that games have had ricocheting bullets before, they've had rounds which penetrate differently, but I have never seen one which captures all of the elements of ballistics in such pristine detail in a way which is actually tangible. It's not just stat numbers and spreadsheets, you can see this with your own eyes. This ballistics gel demonstration is the perfect example of what I mean. This FMJ round, it penetrates the soft target, creating this expansion, that temporary cavity I mentioned earlier, and then the round exits. But when fired through wood, the entry wound creates a far more devastating initial cavity expansion before traveling through the target. Next, here's M995. "9mm rounds, of course, do far less penetration or overall damage to the soft target due to their comparatively lesser muzzle velocity and kinetic energy transfer. All of these rounds that we just looked at were designed for penetration first. One that isn't is this hollow point 5.56 ammo. Hollow points are designed to massively expand immediately upon impact, meaning the initial cavity and permanent wound are absolutely devastating, while of course providing significantly less penetration capability. Okay, so this is all a very cool tech demo, but how does this actually play into gameplay? Isn't this just damage numbers like any game, but with more steps? Well, no, for two reasons. One, the actual organs, bones, tissues, etc. of the human body are modeled. No HP or limb health. You have blood, vitals, etc. Lose too much blood and you enter a coma and you're gonna need to be resuscitated. Get hit in a vital organ, you die. And secondly, the way bullets are moving before hitting a soft target affect that soft target in drastically different ways because of everything that we just mentioned. Everything on Lamang Island, either AI bandits, military, enemy player PMCs, or worse, will be a major threat to you, and you're going to need to make sure that you stay on your toes and understand these systems if you want to even have a chance at survival. But okay, what about the fun part, the shooting? Well, fear not, because that is as heavily simulated as every other thing that I've talked about today. To explain, let's talk about recoil. Weapon recoil is one of the most contentious aspects of realism, so-called, in tactical shooter games. Whether or not a game's recoil is realistic is discussed ad nauseum. Everything from Squad to Escape from Tarkov have seen legitimate controversy surrounding recoil mechanics. Well, of course we won't know until we play this game ourselves, but here's something to get us started. A direct one-to-one comparison of a person firing an AR-15 in real life and someone firing the same rifle in GZW. I realized after watching this recent devlog demo that I had no idea how weapon recoil worked in real life, and here's a little anecdote to give an example. As we were watching this, one of the creators in chat asked if the weapon's recoil would be affected by the incrementally reduced weight as bullets were fired from the magazine. Essentially, would the gun get lighter as more rounds left the barrel, changing how the weapon felt? Wow, I thought, okay, these guys are good, but you're getting a little bit in too deep here. I don't think we need to expect realism to go that far. Well, color me surprised when Mara went, yeah, we simulated that. According to this devlog, mastering recoil in GZW will come down to several modifiers. We can see some in the weapon inspect menu here. Apparently, there can be up to 10% difference in felt recoil while firing an AR pattern rifle specifically, depending on if the magazine is full or empty. Different patterns of weapon will act differently, of course, and here's another little detail. Part of felt recoil on an automatic rifle is the bolt sliding backward to rechamber a new round and then returning to its initial position. The weapon rocks back and forth from this, initially causing backwards motion and then forwards again to sort of re-stabilize the weapon slightly. This, of course, doesn't happen on a bolt action rifle, as the only moving action is the firing pin striking the round and then the kinetic force of the expanding gases and the resulting shot. It's important to note that in GZW, you play as a Special Forces trained PMC operative. You're no stranger to weapons handling. Your character's training will of course help you manage that felt recoil, but all those complex modifiers on the weapon as it shoots will mean that every shot will feel slightly different, as well as modifiers to your character himself. Stamina, for example. If you've been running or moving sporadically, your aim and stability will be compromised, meaning your aim won't be steady. Aiming down sights will cause your arms to get tired as well, and your aim will waver over time. It's all stuff that you're going to have to pay attention to and think about. Choosing when to fire will be as important as if you should fire at all. The term realism in the case of gray zone warfare could easily be intertwined with attention to detail. As I've mentioned in the past, one of the reasons that I got interested in the development of this game in the first place was how it sought influence from real, knowledgeable sources on the subject matter that it portrayed. The first major example of this I covered on the channel was MFG's collaboration with Sean McFate, an ex-mercenary turned academic, who helped influence the politics of the game. Well, it's a shooter game, so if you're gonna have a game with firearms, why not seek the advice of gaming's favorite firearms expert, Jonathan Ferguson, English author and weapons historian who is currently the keeper of firearms and artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in Leeds, England. Now, of course, Ferguson was never a soldier or a PMC, so what the devs seem to have collaborated with him on here is the real complexities of not just statistics and slight variations between rounds and ammunitions, weapon variants, etc., but in the reality of the various scarcities of these things. Which bullets would exist in a conflict like the one portrayed in the game? Who would have which bullets? And how much would they cost if they could get them?
Now I didn't realise you were specifically looking at Laos. I've got contacts and I do work in the small arms proliferation field in my spare time.
When I first saw this game behind closed doors, I noticed that almost every player was using an AR pattern rifle, an M4 Mark 18 or something similar, and firing 5.56 FMJ or M855 rounds. Seeing the kind of research that they've done on the world of PMCs, as well as taking influence from an ex-Special Forces operator, this kind of makes sense. Realism here extends to what kind of weapons you see on the field. PMCs would likely prefer M4 pattern rifles. Bandits or gang members in the specific region would have access to plenty of Soviet surplus and civilian hunting weapons and rounds, and the military, of course, will then have their own specific subset of weapons. It's not, by the way, that strange or obscure weapons or ammunitions won't have their place in this game. Far from it. The devs brought a list of ammunitions for Ferguson to give input on, one of which was a strange discontinued Czech 9mm armor-piercing round called Libra Snail.
When I looked it up, and I looked on the Cartridge Collectors Forum, they were well aware of it. So yeah, that was a new one to me, but I've chosen it well, because it's one that looks to be common enough that it would be around, and genuinely quite capable from what I can see.
I have to say, seeing Jonathan Ferguson show up here is so interesting to me because we've seen for years these videos of him reacting to weapons in various games. This is, as far as I know, the first time he has directly given input on a game while it is currently being developed. I think that the key word to all of this that I've been discussing is depth. I explained before that the specificity of the setting and scenario of this game is why I found it intriguing in the first place. It just felt like it was taking things a little further than I was used to seeing. There was more world building in the small teaser of the lore that we saw a couple months ago than in entire AAA shooter games, and that was just scratching the surface. I feel like, especially after seeing this devlog, MFG's attention to detail in this game is actually teaching me things about the real world that I didn't know before. I'd never even heard of the term terminal ballistics before looking into this game, same as I had never heard of the political term gray zone warfare. And it's that depth that personally really draws me in. You sometimes hear people critique an open world game, saying as wide as an ocean but as shallow as a puddle. And that, I think, should be the point, getting a game to be the opposite of that. While the core of this game is going to be about exploration and immersive way to complete missions with a squad, it's that infinite depth underneath the surface that lets nerds like me really nerd out over the details. And that's why I want to publicly urge the devs to do something specific here. I've already told them this personally, but I'm just going to put it out there again. Please, let us test the weapons and ballistics like in this demo in the game itself. I legitimately think that the mechanics on display here are something truly new to most people. I've never seen a game with actual ballistics gel or armor penetration test environments. It's next level stuff. So it doesn't need to be in the early access release or even anytime soon. But me, personally, I could sit in a range adjusting optics, messing with attachments, and testing different rounds against materials like this for hours. Marek Rabas in 2022 spoke at the Game Access conference in Brno, addressing the question, how far can we push realism in FPS games compared to a real combat experience? He shared the problems and challenges the company encountered, the decisions they made in order to gamify real-life scenarios, all in an attempt to try and evolve the FPS genre. Me, personally, a game which actively pushes the envelope, actively strays away from the comfortable or familiar, that's a game that I want to give the time of day. Of course, we won't know until we play it ourselves, but as for evolving the genre, MFG do seem to be trying harder than anything that I've seen in a long time. Thanks for watching. Okay, so before you go, I want to say thank you for the support on the channel as always, and I also want to clarify a bit about my plans for it going forward. I continuously get comments claiming that I'm paid to make videos of this game particularly, and to answer that, I'll give you a little story. I was recently contacted with offers to do paid promotional content for a sci-fi extraction shooter. You may have seen some other creators do videos on it recently. I declined, not because I thought the game looked bad at all, but because it just didn't personally interest me. I take short ad integrations here and there to help support myself, of course, but as for full-length, long-form content, I will only only ever cover something that truly interests me personally, whether sponsored or not. I just thought that deserved some transparency for you all. I wholeheartedly intend nothing more than to talk about whatever it is I am currently thinking about in a way that brings some sort of value to you, the viewer, teaches you something that you maybe didn't know, helps you think about things in a new way, etc. That being said, this game, Gray Zone Warfare, will certainly continue to be a part of my channel as long as I find it interesting, and with some pretty juicy stuff on the horizon, you're likely going to be seeing quite a bit of it. This channel is a completely self-run show, by the way, so if you do enjoy what you're seeing and want to help support it, the join feature is now active on here. As a channel member, you'll get to see videos a bit early if possible, but more importantly, you'll get a little badge next to your name, which actively makes you cooler in real life, by the way. Of course, if you're new, subscribe if you haven't, and if you made it this far into the video, let me know by leaving a comment with the word nice. Just nice. That's simple. Until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll be seeing you very soon with more. Cheers.